Today we embark on a journey in Colorado history about how the West was won through railroad expansion. This is a very exciting video that I've been wanting to do for a long time, because if we follow the railroads in Colorado, we can see exactly how this state was developed through boom and bust operations, economic depressions, railroads failing, railroads succeeding, towns forming, ghost towns forming, and eventually Colorado takes shape through the help of the railroad. This is a story of how Colorado was shaped through railroads. Colorado at the beginning really had no need for railroads because people didn't know that the mountains were rich. This is a later time, and that's a lot of because of General Long and his expedition to find a route to the Pacific Ocean, and they came through Colorado, and he called the area east of the Front Range unusable desert. Well, we proved him wrong. The Rocky Mountains were to the west. This is an impassable zone that General Long kind of avoids and then follows the South Platte River. The Colorado at the time of the Louisiana Purchase and at the end of the Spanish-American War, when it becomes a territory, is this inveritable kind of obscure Western post for the economy of fur trading at the time. This is how people were making money until the Cherokee Indians get forced out of Georgia. And in Georgia, they were mining gold. So they come here, they look for gold, they find it. It doesn't take long for Western expansionists to come to Denver either to look. And right here at Confluence River, they find Placer gold. Gold and mining, as soon as it's discovered, what follows is the railroad. And this starts the Colorado Railroad Wars. A series of different companies start up, go and fail, and the most successful ones pave the path to the mountains, so that way the richness of all of the ore can be extracted and easily transported to the markets of the East. Today you're going to see a lot of sights and scenes from the Colorado Railroad Museum in Golden, Colorado. Truly, you can live in the history of the trains that we explore here today. We're going to take you on a tour of that as well, once we talk a little bit of train history. We are Colorado Railroad Museum, all in our matching, very plain gray shirts. Before we go any further, let's talk about the battle between Golden and Denver. I have to say, I don't make money doing this. I make money by being a top 1% broker owner here in the Denver area. And I've got to say, every agent and lender that hears about me doing this channel and I'm not doing, those classic 5 reasons why to move to Denver, say, there's no way you're gonna attract people that wanna buy real estate from you. And if you're like me, you like proving realtors and lenders wrong. So if you enjoy our channel, please, if you're thinking about moving, buying, selling, investing in this area, I'd love to have a conversation to tell you how I can help. Before all of the railroad lines came, there were stagecoach routes. And I've done a lot of videos on the different stagecoach routes that are in Colorado. Without a doubt, the railroads used these routes to get through the mountains. And there was a battle and a need in the United States to form the Transcontinental Railroad, a railroad that goes from the east at the Atlantic Ocean to the west, all the way to the Pacific Ocean. A lot of cities were fighting at this point in Colorado and outside of Colorado to be the city that the Transcontinental Railroad went through. Denver was fighting for it. It made deals with Union Pacific. Golden was fighting for it. It made deals with Union Pacific. They even paid the surveyors to come out here and look in the Rocky Mountains to find out what's a way we can get through these things. But what they found was these mountains are big. To get through them, we're gonna have to dynamite out at least a 3.5 mile tunnel, no matter what route we go. Unfortunately, as soon as the Union Pacific decided to build the Transcontinental Railroad, they built it through what was at the time called Cheyenne City. It's now Cheyenne. And the Union Pacific Transcontinental Railroad bypasses Denver, Colorado, and Golden, Colorado. Two cities that we're gonna see butt heads several times and make acquisitions and deals to try to thwart each other and bring economy and prosperity to the region through their own respective cities. But at this time, neither one of them win. The railroad goes through Cheyenne, goes through Utah, ends up on the Pacific Ocean, and Colorado is forgotten about, which ticks off a lot of cities like Denver and another city which will become important, Kansas City, as well. Both Denver and Golden are ticked off, and they both try to make deals with the Union Pacific to run a separate line that runs from Cheyenne and comes down to one of their respective cities. And Union Pacific, being the savvy business that they were, said, well, yeah, if you can get the state of Colorado, or a territory, to pay for most of this, we'll do it. They told them both the same thing. They sent surveyors to both of them. Both of them had extreme hope that this would happen. But there are two financiers, which if you live in Colorado, you've heard of these people. Evans and Moffett. You know, like the Moffett Tunnel, and Evans, who founded DU and did the Sand Creek Massacre and was territorial governor of Colorado. These young guys at the time continue heading west in the hopes of making a big fortune. When gold is discovered, 100,000 people come into this region. 2/3 of them leave the region disappointed. Maybe we have a little bit of that in Denver now. The hopefuls coming in. And I just don't think we leave the region disappointed because it's so beautiful here and we love it. But here's what I have to say, is these two guys came up with a plan. They formed the Denver Pacific Railroad, which is gonna link Denver with Cheyenne and put it back on the map. And they make a deal with the Union Pacific to make a road so that way all the grading's done and you can lay tracks even easier. The Union Pacific abandons this idea. At the same time, the Kansas Pacific Railroad is forming because Kansas City is also ticked off. The Transcontinental Railroad didn't go through there either. So they're like, well, what if we connect to Denver and then Denver connects up to the Transcontinental Railroad? Then we've got a connection into this thing. So the Kansas Pacific comes in and partners with Moffett and Evans as soon as the Union Pacific pulls out and they complete the line up to Cheyenne. Now, Golden's kind of ticked off. They're left out, and, you know, we're gonna beat Denver to be the territorial and the state capital. You all know how that went for them, but they play their cards next. Golden's card, the Colorado Central. They're like, yeah, you connected to Cheyenne, but we're gonna connect to all of this wealth that's in the mountains, and we're gonna make you go through Golden to get to the mountains, so that way all of the wealth that's coming through is also going to pass through Golden. So the Colorado Central is this big answer to the Denver Pacific Railroad, which runs up to Cheyenne. But of course, they need to connect to Cheyenne. And this is how some of the towns in the West Denver suburbs are formed or become really prominent, because this station stops in Arvada. It stops in Golden twice. And we go to the Railroad Museum, actually, that was one of the junction stops that would send people to Boulder, into the new mining fields that were found in Gold Hill. We did a whole video on this that talks about how gold was discovered there, and it sends it west as well to Idaho Springs, Blackhawk, and eventually Central City. What allowed this to really become an idea was mining became more profitable. Yes, gold was discovered in 1859 here in Colorado, but as soon as the easy veins of gold were mined, it became clear that new technology was needed to extract the gold from the mountains. And in the 1870s, smelting becomes a thing and makes it easier to extract things like gold and silver from mines, which makes Colorado now, I guess, a gold mine, so to speak, literally, you know? So Golden, with the Colorado Central, forms the route to the mines, which is very important. However, there's another collapse in 1873. There's like financial collapse after financial collapse at this time of great expansion in the United States. And that's because investors were manipulating things like these railroads. They were buying and dumping stock, which would devalue them. And eventually all this stuff unraveled in the Great Panic of 1873, which puts a halt to a lot of these railroads and a reconsolidation effort of these railroads too. The Colorado Central gets a prominent ally in the Union Pacific to thwart the Denver Pacific and to create a new transcontinental line. And this is why the Colorado Central runs through the Boulder Valley to Longmont and eventually to this little train outpost called Julesburg, which was the Transcontinental Railroad's one stop 9 miles south of Wyoming that it made in Colorado. So they can completely bypass this Denver Pacific Railroad at that time. Now Evans and Moffett are kind of ticked off about this. So they think, oh, well, let's form another railroad. The South Park and Pacific Narrow Gauge Line, which we did a video on from Roxborough and followed some of its line. It was dubbed the Railroad Line from Nowhere to Nowhere, and the idea was to create the economies by forming this railroad line from nowhere to nowhere. And it did. There were some big mining operations open in the South Park region: Fairplay, Breckenridge, Leadville. Now, if you're interested in living this history, you've got to go to the Golden Train Museum, which is at the Golden Junction here. And it's a great nonprofit that's done a lot to preserve this railroad history and allows you to get on and live the railroad history. We see a lot of the trains that we're focused on in this video right here. Particularly, there's the Denver and Rio Grande. There was a Colorado and Northwestern. There's an old steam cog that went up on Pikes Peak Mountain, as well as a lot of the old cars that went up there as well. See a lot of Rio Grande boxcars, an old water tower to fill up the trains, and Bodie's having a good time. He was scared by the noises. But this is a true testament to history here. And you get to go on some of these old train cars as well. Looks a little bit like Amtrak to me, but you know, we haven't really made that much advancement here in the United States, huh? Comment below on what you think about that. Kind of crazy. There's all these toy model trains as well. Would love to see this become a restaurant to bring back that dining car experience. There's some model trains inside, this cool museum inside with all sorts of old train memorabilia as well. You've got to check this place out. It is phenomenal. We go into some of the old cabooses. Give a little perspective here. I'm pretty tall, but you can kind of stand in here. classic. The car, it's pretty comfortable. Yeah, if you're someone like me and you totally geek out about this stuff, the museum is the place for you. They even have a library that you can rent to go in, which I'm excited to do someday, so that way I can even learn more train history. Sounds amazing, right? Got stuff to buy in here. See?
In a book.
Wow. While everybody was thinking to go west into the mountains, Palmer, who if you're a Colorado Springs resident, you definitely recognize that name, thought, wow, these people are kind of dumb, because you know what a really easy railroad line would be? Along the Front Range, south into the Mexican territory, a whole new economy and an easier route to the Pacific Ocean through Mexico. And this is when the Denver and Rio Grande Railroad was formed. Palmer, of course, was a heavy investor in Colorado Springs. He gathers a lot of money from Great Britain. A lot of these British people are like, wow, that sounds pretty nice over there. And Colorado Springs, really, its first inhabitants for this reason were British people, because Palmer was an expert at going over to Europe and convincing them, we've got to do this. So he forms a narrow gauge railroad line that goes from Denver, and then it cuts all the way to Santa Fe, New Mexico, and puts a lot of these areas on the map. It first ran to Pueblo only, eventually it extends over. But Palmer enters his bid with the Denver and Rio Grande Railroad coming into existence, running from the north to the south, and a lot of these towns are formed because of that. Palmer also revolutionizes the way that railroads are built. He was a railroad guy. He worked on railroads pretty much in his entirety as a youth. So he had some ideas, and that was, if we made the track narrow gauge, only about 3 feet apart, it decreased the weight of the track, therefore making it cheaper to build. It also decreases what goes on the track, the locomotive and the cars that follow the locomotive, they weigh less. So all in all, it decreases the amount of construction by about 1/3. So Palmer revolutionizes the way that these railroads are built, and these narrow gauge lines also are way better at going through the mountains because apparently they gain more traction. Problem for the Denver and Rio Grande, another competitor comes into existence because they ran its lines like right next to some of their own lines. You're gonna recognize this name. The Atchison, Topeka, and Santa Fe Railroad makes another east to west through the southern corridor of Colorado expansion. And the problem is they build really, really fast and provide a ample competitor to the Denver and Rio Grande Railroad that was Palmer's dream. And this is all happening before 1873, this great panic that we're talking about. And this is just to really give you an idea that railroad at this time was not a monopolized, centralized industry. It was a bunch of small railroads that were competing. And therefore, some people like Mr. Gould, who was notorious, we're going to talk about here in just a second, they invested in railroads, shorted them to fail them, so that way they could buy them, consolidate them, and then sell them to the big giants like Union Pacific. And if this sounds a little bit like what's happening with private property today, you're absolutely right. This is not a new trick. This is an old one. This is a very old one. Consolidate independent ownership and smaller companies into one bigger company, because then only a few really, really rich people win, and small people starting businesses, they all lose. They all lose really, really big. And that is 1873 United States of America. 1873 proved to be a big opportunity for people like Jay Gould, who was dubbed the quintessential 19th century robber baron of the railroads, and through his efforts systematically dismantled the profits of the Colorado Central, the Denver and Rio Grande, the Denver Pacific, and bought them while they were suffering. He dismantled some of the tracks. He made them a little bit more profitable as the United States swings out of this negative economy, which, by the way, was formed by people like Jay Gould, who found a way to manipulate the stock prices of the trains, reconsolidates them, and sells them to the Union Pacific Railroad, marking really the end of this vulnerable time in railroad. And it's vulnerable not because small people are starting businesses like they would like it to believe, just like the bank panic of 2008. It wasn't the banks, it was the larger system of the mortgage-backed security and the betting on that allowed the housing market to unravel and allowed small banks to die and big banks to absorb them. This is exactly what is happening with the railroad enterprise at this time. And Jay Gould, who I guess has an appropriate last name, was the big guy behind this. He buys these railroads, he consolidates them, he makes them pretty much like obsolete and gets their profits to be a little bit more, and then he sells them to the Union Pacific. I think they call that cigar butt investment. What Warren Buffett is famous for. Like I said, there are no new tricks in the book. They're just old tricks that we keep falling for some reason, but let's not get too philosophical here. This is about trains, not about the economy. All of this reconsolidation's really happening around 1876. Colorado becomes a state. When is that? When does Colorado become a state? Oh, 1876. That's right. And the reason they become a state is because of the mineral wealth. Otherwise, they would not have become a state so early. I mean, just being this territory that not many people lived in, it was rich with minerals. And Jay Gould pretty much kills the Golden Connection because his loyalties lie with Denver, because the railroads that he owns go through Denver. So the East and the West battle between Denver and Golden, Denver wins. This is one of the ways Denver wins. It also wins the state capital thanks to Mr. Henry Brown. We did a video on the Brown Palace where we go over this as well. It's too much for this video. Check out some of those other ones. But Denver comes out on top because Denver is partnered with these dirty Wall Street businessmen like Jay Gould. Bloody angle. Now that the North's railroads had been consolidated to the Union Pacific, Jay Gould, who owned half of the Santa Fe, and Palmer, who owns the Rio Grande, Masterson, who owns the other half of the Santa Fe, they decide we're gonna battle it out. Now let's talk about the Battle of the Bloody Angle. Since Jay Gould had consolidated the railroads to the Union Pacific in the north and going west from Denver, it's now time for the Santa Fe and the Rio Grande Railroad to duke it out. And I mean, this one is called the Bloody Angle for a reason. It got bloody, and that's because the Rio Grande and the Santa Fe wanted to do the same thing. Get to Leadville. Leadville, which was rich in silver ore, had no easy way to get it out, and the Rio Grande and the Santa Fe saw it as an opportunity. They battled over the Raton Pass. They leased sections of each other's railroads. They went through Canyon City, and eventually, the Rio Grande wins, finding its way to Leadville, but not without the help of our friend, Mr. Jay Gould. He lets these railroads battle it out in classic Game of Thrones style. just weakening each other through court battle after court battle. Who gets to go to Leadville? Who has the rights? They're both trying to form their own way. The Santa Fe wins the Raton Pass. Rio Grande says, I don't give up. And they go through Canyon City. While they're doing all of this, Jay Gould sits back and eventually acquires half of the Rio Grande from our friend, Mr. Palmer. And to Masterson, the owner of the Santa Fe Railroads, they have to reach a truce at this point because it got bloody. I mean, like, really bloody. Palmer sent his boys on the Rio Grande Railroad through areas that the Santa Fe was leasing from them with guns. And this armed train took over all the Santa Fe Railroad stations through force. Now, of course, most of the railroad workers did surrender, but I mean, like, 2 were killed. It got literally bloody. These thugs were coming through, taking back their railroad, which was rightfully theirs. And Jay Gould sits back, he watches, and he acquires, and he puts an end to this war in, it looks like it was 1880. And the Rio Grande makes its way to Leadville. They agree not to go further south, and the Santa Fe gets everything to the south. Thank you, Jay Gould, for putting an end to this bloody war, which I'm sure he helped fund and fuel. Past the 1880s, the bonanza really picked up, and this is when transcontinental aspirations came to the forefront again, going through several different routes depending on which railroad it was. And there were 3 main players at the time: the Union Pacific, the Rio Grande, and the Denver and South Park lines. Denver and South Park, of course, being owned by Evans, Rio Grande being owned by Palmer, Union Pacific largely controlled by Gould, although Gould has shares in all of them, which allows him to devalue them and invest in them, so that way he can take more control of each one of these companies. But both and all of them have aspirations to go to the west and eventually connect all of Colorado through the railroad wars, and a great expansion happens at this time. It was actually the end of competition that led to the railway's demise. I mean, go figure. This is a basic fundamental law in capitalism, is that competition is good. People get frustrated with monopolies. Monopolies raise prices on people and cut into the earnings of the average everyday American. So go figure. Railroads met their demise because of the mass monopolization of the railroads. And by the time we turn around into 1900, the railroad companies are pretty much just 3, and they're minding their own business, almost like they've got the same ownership structures. There's the Rio Grande, there is the Union Pacific, and there's the Burlington. The Burlington is going on Santa Fe's old route there, north-south along the Front Range. The Union Pacific is controlling northern Colorado, and the Rio Grande is controlling the mountains in Colorado. And to be honest, people kind of hated the railroads at this time because they weren't fighting for your business. That means they had a monopoly on pricing, which the railroads came in to make freight less expensive, to make businesses be able to flourish in these areas. But as soon as they had a monopoly, they could make the freight rate whatever they wanted. But little did they know, Henry Ford had something to say about this. The automobile, which transforms the railroad industry into something that's not just freight, it's something that's tourism, which is the one good thing the railroads had going for them, is if they went through the mountains, odds are it was pretty, and it makes the tourist economy boom. But automobiles change freight in Colorado and allow for a competitor that's less expensive than the railroads. So the 1920s was a period where really 2,000 miles of train track that was strenuously laid in Colorado is now abandoned, and it's expensive to maintain, and the advent of the automobile makes it something that's really not practical anymore. So there was a little bit of expansion. The Moffat Tunnel opened at this time under the Rio Grande to plow into the Fraser Valley from Denver. But tourism really revives a lot of these old railroads. The Georgetown Loop being a feat in engineering, which was a way for the railroad to get into the mining districts. And it was such a steep grade that they had to loop it. It gets revived, and it's now open and something you can ride. The Royal Gorge train, the Durango Silverton, which was kind of the archetype model, never really lost riders because it was such a beautiful train ride that it attracted so much tourism. So we have to thank tourism for preserving the remnants of a lot of these narrow gauge railroad tracks in Colorado. Of course, Burlington Northern and the Santa Fe merge, and the Union Pacific, it become two of the huge players here in freight in the United States, and a lot of these standard gauge lines that were laid for those are still used today. But by and large, the automobile industry reshapes American transportation, and the train depots that towns were once centered around, like Union Station in Denver, now become obsolete. And if it wasn't for historic revitalization that happened in Denver, i.e. Crawford did a lot of that, a lot of these historic places would be gone too. It's interesting to go into modernity now and see the resurgence of the need of rail. Elon Musk is proposing a fast line that goes between New York City and London, and will get you there in under an hour. There's also the fast train that is supposed to go between Las Vegas and California that is under construction right now. And let's be honest, it seems like kind of train technology just stopped there in the United States because of the automobile. Wow, would it have been cool if we would have gone the train route, which is something I guess that they're trying to bring back here in Colorado. There's actually an approved development for a train that will connect the whole Front Range from Fort Collins to Colorado Springs in I think it's 40 minutes from Denver to Fort Collins, which would be awesome because traffic sucks here. We see other developing countries like China implementing railways heavily, and the United States has by and large abandoned them. So, will we see a resurgence in rail? Comment below on what you think.
If you enjoyed this one, make sure to like and subscribe for more of this.